Here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. We begin with the fast approaching U.S. elections. Republicans are kicking off their party convention on Monday and will last until August the 27th. Mr. Trump is the GOP's sole nominee, and his nomination will officially launch his re-election bid. Last week, Democrats had their party convention and officially nominated Joe Biden. With the two sides gearing up for confrontation at the polls, politicians from both parties have ramped up their policies on China in their campaign. How big is the impact of U.S. policy on China in this election? We invited two senior experts from both sides to discuss several key issues. Let's listen to their discussions. For more on the U.S. elections and the U.S.-China ties, we have in Shanghai Wu Xinbo, director from the Center for American Studies with Fudan University. In Boston, Robert Ross, associated John King Fairbanks Center for Chinese Studies with Harvard University. Welcome to our program. We hope we're going to see each other soon, hopefully after that election, which we're going to focus on right now. How do you see the China topic likely to be in the overall agenda? Professor Ross.
You will hear loud rhetoric on the part of both President Trump and Joe Biden about China. And of course, President Trump has been anti-China since his first campaign. It was all China, China, China. And he came in with a trade war against China, which he believes his base likes. So during a campaign, the Democratic candidate cannot appear weak. So Joe Biden will sound equally tough. But we should not interpret his language, his rhetoric, as his true policy preferences. He has said the trade war is a disaster. He wants to deal with global climate change and rejoin the Paris Peace Accord. He wants to rejoin the World Health Organization, and all those require cooperation with China. So I think within the context of our overall competition, there could be significant room for improvement, despite the rhetoric of the Biden campaign.
Professor Wu, agree with your colleague?
For Trump, I think this is a time that China will be his single most important foreign policy instrument to promote his campaign purpose. He wanted to emphasize that he was tough on China on economic issues, and also he wanted to attack China for his disastrous handling of the coronavirus. And also he will attack China for the reason that Biden is suspected to have somehow close relations with China and has been weak on China in that matter. So overall, I think Trump has a much stronger, powerful China agenda as compared with Joe Biden.
I see. Professor Wu, on the other hand, when the two candidates are having some degrees of China agenda on their election campaign, what about China? According to Chinese ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Cui Tiankai, he said recently that China does not want to wait out for the results of the U.S. election before talking about China-U.S. relations. Obviously, he suggested that China does not have a preference. Is that what China is having in mind?
Well, my understanding is that we realize that both candidates have a tough China policy one way or another. So there is not a China preference for who is going to be the next U.S. president. At the same time, I think we take a long-term perspective on relations with the United States, not the short term, not something in the next 3 months. So China really has its own agenda for relations with the United States. And thirdly, in dealing with the provocation from the Trump administration currently, I think China has its own tactic, has its own temper, and has its own agenda.
Tactic, tempo, agenda. I'm going to come back to you and ask exactly what those are. But now I want to come back to Professor Ross. from China's perspective, the next few months are going to be the U.S. people, people in the United States, voters, to decide who's going to be your president. And China suggested even earlier that there's no capability from China's part to be able to in any way influence the U.S. election, nor interest to do that. Professor Ross, however, people argue that what the current administration, at least some members of the current administration, is trying to do right now could lead the China-U.S. relations to an extent that there could be hardly any return. Now, if you look at the latest news every day, there seems to be a trend like that. Are you worried?
Well, a number of things you said I do worry about. You used the word provoke, and yes, I do believe the administration is trying in various ways to provoke the Chinese government to retaliate, because I believe the administration would like to see an escalated relationship, and there are people in the administration who would like to see a Cold War, which we don't have right now. So that patience and waiting for the next president is China's best tactic. To retaliate now and to escalate the tension would make it much more difficult to restore a more cooperative relationship after the election. Also, I do believe you're correct that the administration would like to present the next president, if it's not President Trump, with a fait accompli. Having made the relationship so bad, that would be hard to turn it back, both for domestic politics and because of the tension in the relationship. But I do want to go back to what the objectives are of a potential Biden presidency. And the way I sum it up is to say, we will cooperate where we can and compete where we must. And that's what I agree with Wu Xiaobo, that this is a balanced policy compared to Trump. For Trump wants an across-the-board, all-of-government competition with China, and a balanced policy is cooperate where you can. And that could be in global warming, that can be in global health, that can be in resolving trade crises, all simultaneously competing, because this is what great powers do, and America will continue to compete.
What's happening at the ballot box usually has a lot to do, my American friends told me, about the kitchen table discussions, which means all the big issues have to be filtered to lives of Americans before that becomes an issue. Therefore, no matter what the current president is trying to do in terms of putting China on the big topic list, what has been the result so far, Professor Ross? I mean, you live in Boston right now, even though now people do not that much face-to-face interaction with one another. But tell me about what exactly is the atmosphere about China, for example.
Well, we should understand that the four most important issues for the voters in this election are the economy, it's COVID, it's race relations, and it's health care. The number of people who care about foreign policy in an election is 2%. So Donald Trump can bash China, he can yell about China, but the candidate who gives the most confidence in these four issues, the economy, COVID, health care, and race relations, is the one that's going to win the most votes. So yes, Wu Xiaobo is correct. Donald Trump's primary foreign policy agenda is China. He has no successful domestic agenda except his hard right-wing attacks on minorities, which is not going to win votes in the suburbs, among minorities, among the educated. So it's going to be China, China, China. But most people don't care about foreign policy in this election. And when it comes to the economy, the people want a president who will restore economic growth, not a president who's going to cause more international conflicts.
On the other hand, though, some suggest that what President Trump now is doing are the things that others possibly coming into the White House also aspire to do in terms of cracking China as a less competitive partner in the future. And therefore, Donald Trump finished the job. It's easier for the next one. And there's no return anyway, even voluntarily. What do you think?
Well, first, that may be the objective of the Trump administration, to start a competition that the United States thinks it can win. But most economists say the trade war has not been good for the United States. Most economists believe that China is coming out of the trade war faster, with a faster rate of growth in the United States. So that despite an objective to crack China early, it's not succeeding. And then second, if the objective of the American voter is to restore growth and restore health, bashing China, competing with China, will not achieve that. Indeed, just the opposite. To restore economic growth and to get the American economy going again, we need to end the trade war.
Logic, does it work in politics? I really wonder about that question. Professor Wu, what's your observation?
I think Trump could have a larger effect from his China card on the election this year had it not been because of the disastrous handling of the coronavirus, had it not been because of the protests and the riots coming out from the trans-race relations. So I agree with Bob that priority issues for the voters this year are really unemployment, economic recession, pandemic, as well as healthcare and race relations. So those issues somehow overshadowed the China card. Trump originally planned to play out in the campaign. Originally, he could have shown that because he was tough on China, so he imposed a trade deal on China and forced China to agree to buy more American products. And also, he could claim that he has been successful in bringing the U.S. manufacturing industry back to the U.S. But now, because of this social, economic, and pandemic situation, those so-called achievements pales. So I think that is sometimes the China card diminishes in terms of its benefits for Trump's campaign.
Professor Wu, you talk about China's tactics, agenda, and also target in terms of U.S.-China relations. What exactly are those? What are some of the rationales and the logics China is having in its internal debate about a longer-term relation with the United States?
Well, in terms of the tactic, I would describe it as kind of selective tit-for-tat tactic. When the Trump administration closed down the Chinese consulate in Houston, retaliated by closing down the U.S. consulate in Chengdu. That's typical tit-for-tat strategy. On the other hand, when the U.S. put more than 100 Chinese companies on the entity list, put sanctions on so many Chinese companies, China has been very careful and cautious in sanctioning U.S. companies doing business in China. Instead, we open wider the market, improve the commercial environment for the U.S. investors, because we do not want to see decoupling of two economies. Before the election or before January 20th next year, we have to be careful about a possible conflict, crisis, military, between two countries. This may play into the hands of Trump and his hawkish followers. So, as you can tell from the recent phone conversation between two defense ministers, actually two militaries, their leadership have expressed the willingness to manage the tension and reduce the possibility for accidents between two militaries. In the long term, I think the agenda for China to handle relations with the U.S. is we want to see stability in this relationship. And two, we still believe it is possible to seek a win-win result for two countries in both economic and other areas. And thirdly, this relationship has to be constructive because these two countries have an important role to play in global governance, in providing public goods to the world. So if these two countries, they cannot have a constructive relationship, that will be a disaster for the entire world. I think that's the agenda for China to handle relations with the United States.
You know, what about the short term, especially the most important crisis to be avoided, Professor Ross, a military conflict or accidents? China could only do too much. China could only do much.
Yes.
To do, but if provocation going to a certain extent, or bottom line issue of Taiwan, it is putting China into a corner.
I agree with you. The administration seems intent on provoking China, whether it's more frequent operations in the South China Sea with its carriers, with its destroyers, whether it's more frequent transits through the Taiwan Strait, or it's more up-tempo cooperation with Taiwan politics and arms sales. And yes, you're right. There's only so much the mainland can accept on Taiwan, and certainly the risk of an accident in the South China Sea is increasing. So far, China has responded in ways one might say are cautious and sending warnings to both Taiwan and the United States without crossing any red lines that could lead to escalation. So we're seeing more Chinese exercises around Taiwan, more overflights to the Taiwan Strait, reminding the Taiwan people and the Taiwan leadership that, to use a Chinese expression, if you lift a rock, it will drop on your own feet. Taiwan needs to be careful. And that, I think, is the best mainland approach toward Taiwan, is to raise the warnings, raise the tension a bit, without coercing and without leading to a crisis that would not be in any country's interest. Certainly in the South China Sea, an accident could easily escalate. American presence is growing, so this may not be a good time for China to increase its surveillance in corresponding to American up-tempo operations. It's patience, 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 hope for a new leader. There'll be plenty of time for China to retaliate stronger should Donald Trump have a second term in the White House.
We've been hearing Cold War, Thucydides' trap, and even hot war these days, so many times that have led the public to believe that we are really in the middle of it. But I remember very clearly, Professor Ross, you said right there that it is not a Cold War we are in right now. Tell us why, and which stage exactly are we in?
We should remember that the Cold War has a particular historical context of the U.S.-Soviet competition. And that was an ideological competition. There were economic embargoes on each country, no economic trade, no cultural trade, no educational trade, minimal diplomacy. Donald Trump may want to decouple, but he can't. This has a very dense economic relationship, a dense cultural relationship. Educational exchanges will continue, and we have many common interests. China is not a radical, revolutionary power wanting to overthrow the international order. It creates opportunities by participating in that order for the United States and China to cooperate. Nothing could be more different than the Cold War. But then second, we should understand that leaders matter. And the current level of tension between the United States and China, to a significant degree, reflects Donald Trump's personal contribution to the U.S.-China relationship. Just as during the Cold War, Richard Nixon was not the same as Lyndon Johnson, and Jimmy Carter was not the same as Ronald Reagan, we have to understand that much of this is Donald Trump. And so we shouldn't expect a continued straight line trajectory into the future, that these trends will necessarily continue. And there are so many choices that presidents can make and so many grounds for greater cooperation in the international and global system.
Professor Wu, are we in a Cold War? Are we in a hot war? Are we heading for something that we are going to regret in the future?
Well, I think certainly some people in the Trump administration and beyond, they are trying to push our two countries into a new Cold War. These people have been trying to decouple ties between two countries in terms of technology investment and people-to-people exchanges. These people have been trying to demonize China, to portray China as an enemy, a national security threat. If you look at the recent speeches by several secretaries and cabinet members of the Trump administration, that is a very well-concerted speech demonizing China and mobilizing the U.S. public in getting prepared for a possible Cold War with China. And also, Secretary Pompeo traveled all over the world, especially to Europe, trying to build a new coalition against China. So if we are not yet in a Cold War, I think some people in the Trump administration are certainly trying to prepare for a Cold War with China, And I'm very much concerned about that if Trump has a second term and these people still work for him.
I agree.
Vote.
Before is that surprising? Anyway, I want to put into a few detailed questions to both of you. As we are going through the election cycle in the United States politics, we're going to see a lot of dramas that might be easily identified as drama, or dramas that might not necessarily easily identify as drama, but rather as reality and facts. So, recently we have seen the accusation towards Steve Bannon, for example, and the closing of accounts of a media company that he established with someone else, and the investigation ongoing about him. How should we understand all of these twists and turns and dramas in U.S. society and all of its possible dramatic impact on an election in which one of those candidates, at least, is putting China on top of the agenda?
We have a very polarized political system. And so Donald Trump's supporters, they're ironclad supporters. They're not going anywhere. We've already had 8 members of his campaign, his last campaign, and his administration be indicted. 4 people have been found guilty. This is clearly one of the most indicted, corrupt administrations in American history, but it hasn't significantly affected his popularity rate among his base, hovering between 41 and 42, 43% of support for the president. So there may well be more indictments. I would suggest that the real indictments are yet to come. Should the president lose this election, should he have to step down, I think the attorney generals, the prosecuting attorneys in New York State are prepared to do much more damage to the president than has been done so far to his aides. So I would look at this as just simply symptomatic of the Trump administration, how it operates, who they respect, who they hire, and the impact on the campaign will probably be nominal. Events like these have an effect. Bit by bit, vote by vote, person by person becomes disaffected. But we can't expect a big swing because of these criminal charges.
Professor Wu, I want you to help us to understand now, until the end of the election, what should be on the minds of most of the Chinese when watching the political drama on display inside the United States? What qualities we need to have ourselves in order to go through this turbulent times?
As one U.S. Professor once noted, there is a hysteric style in American politics. So the American politicians like to resort to demagoguery for their political purpose. So this is very much evident in U.S. presidential elections every 4 years. And China has become the scapegoat for many times. So we should not be surprised about that. And the only difference is that this is the first time China has become really the focal point in its foreign policy area when they want to attack a foreign target. And the second thing is that this time we have to be careful because this is not just a drama. It is more serious than that, because the hawkish people, the conservative people, when they attack China, they really have a deep-rooted ideological and strategic mindset and rationale for attacking China. They do have their own strategic agenda in dealing with China. So it's not just exclusively for the purpose of the election, but they really have a preferred policy and strategy to deal with around China. So from the rhetoric, debate, and noise played out in the campaign, we can have a better sense about how the U.S.-China policy will evolve in the future. So we have to be careful and watching carefully.
Wu Xinbo, Robert Ross, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for both of your insights.